Victor Hale slammed the folder onto the glass table hard enough to crack it. "Find her," he said. "And if she talks, make sure she never talks again." His men didn't ask questions. They never did. Somewhere across Miami, a woman was waking up in a bed that wasn't hers, wearing a dress she didn't remember choosing, next to a man the entire city feared. And she had absolutely no idea that her name had already been signed on a death warrant. Well, if you've never watched one of my stories before, hit that subscribe button right now because this one will have you gripping your seat from beginning to end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The first thing Elena Marquez noticed was the ceiling. It was too high, too white. The kind of ceiling that existed in buildings where regular people didn't live. The kind of ceiling that cost money just to look at. The second thing she noticed was the smell. Not her lavender soap, not the familiar mustiness of her second-floor apartment on Brickell Avenue, where the AC unit rattled every time it rained. This was something else entirely. Cedar, leather, something dark and expensive that she couldn't name but immediately recognized. She had organized the purchase of that cologne herself. 3 Christmases ago. She'd spent 40 minutes on the phone with a boutique in Milan because Damien Valverde refused to wear anything that wasn't custom blended. She remembered rolling her eyes at the time, thinking, who needs a custom blended cologne? Thinking, this man's ego takes up more square footage than my apartment. She lay perfectly still for 4 seconds. Then she turned her head. Damien Valverde was lying 2 feet away from her, on his back, one arm resting across his chest, eyes closed. Still asleep, or pretending to be. With Damien, you could never fully tell. Even asleep, he looked like a man who controlled things. Elena sat up so fast the room tilted. She pressed one hand to her temple and one to the mattress to keep herself upright, and she took inventory with the desperate focus of someone trying to assess damage after a car accident. Her dress, the emerald green one she'd worn to the Valverde Company gala last night, was wrinkled but intact. Her heels were placed neatly beside the bed. Too neatly. Someone had placed them there deliberately. Her phone was on the nightstand. She snatched it. 11 missed calls, 7 from her mother. 2 from her friend Rosa, 1 from a number she didn't recognize, and a text from Rosa at 2:14 in the morning that read, "Elena, call me. I saw something on the security footage from the gala. I don't know what's happening, but call me." Elena stared at that text for a long time. Then the man beside her spoke. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep sitting up that fast." His voice was the same as always, calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that had spent years learning how to say very heavy things like they weighed nothing at all. Elena turned slowly. Damien's eyes were open now, dark brown, almost black in the filtered morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was watching her with that expression she knew, the one that wasn't exactly cold, but wasn't warm either. The one that meant he was thinking 3 steps ahead of whatever was happening out loud. "What," Elena said, "am I doing in your apartment?" It wasn't a question, it was a warning. Damien sat up. He was still dressed, she noticed, shirt slightly open at the collar, the jacket gone, but otherwise the same man she'd sat across from at the Valverde Industries gala less than 12 hours ago. The same gala where she'd drunk 2 glasses of champagne and then apparently lost her entire mind. "We need to talk," he said. "We need to talk," she repeated. "That's what you're opening with. We need to talk." "Elena, I need to know why I woke up in your bed, Damien." Her voice was steady. Impressively steady, she thought, given that her hands were shaking. "I need you to explain that to me very clearly, in very small words, right now." He reached for something on the nightstand on his side of the bed. A manila folder. He held it out to her without a word. She stared at it like it might bite her. Then she took it. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a standard civil marriage certificate, signed and filed with Miami-Dade County at 10:47 p.m. the previous evening. The second was a witness attestation. The third was a photograph, slightly blurred, clearly taken from security footage, but recognizable enough to make her stomach drop straight through the mattress. It was her. Standing in what appeared to be a small private room, smiling at something, holding a pen. Signing. That's not. She stopped, started again. That's not possible. The county clerk's office has a record, Damien said. He wasn't looking at the folder. He was looking at her. The ceremony was conducted by a licensed officiant. There were 2 witnesses. The documents are valid. I don't remember any of this. I know. Damien. She put the folder down on the mattress between them. Her voice had gone very quiet, which was never a good sign. The people who knew Elena Marquez well understood that when she got quiet, she was not calming down. She was focusing. Tell me exactly what happened last night. He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Damien was rarely evasive. He was organizing. She'd watched him do it 1,000 times in boardrooms and back offices and over the phone at midnight when a deal was falling apart. He organized his words the same way he organized everything else, with precision. The gala ended at 9, he said. You had champagne during the toast, and then again during the closing. You seemed fine. I thought you seemed fine. A pause. After the formal event, there was a private dinner for the senior staff. You were there. You had another glass. I remember the dinner. Do you remember what you said during the dinner? She opened her mouth, closed it. She remembered the dinner in pieces, the long table, Rosa sitting across from her, Damien at the head, the way he always was, someone giving a speech about the new contract they'd closed in Bogota. And then she remembered feeling suddenly completely exhausted. Not from alcohol, from years. From 3 years of sitting beside this man and knowing everything about his life and being present for none of it in the way that actually counted. She remembered thinking, I am so tired of being invisible. She did not remember saying it out loud. What did I say? She asked. Damien looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, so fast she almost missed it. Something that wasn't quite discomfort, but was adjacent to it. You said, he began carefully, that you had spent 3 years organizing my life and you were tired of being the person no one ever saw, that you deserved to be standing beside someone, not behind them. He paused. And then you looked at me and said that the only person you had ever wanted to stand beside was me. The silence that followed was extremely loud. I was drunk, Elena said. You were, he agreed. I didn't mean. You also said, Damien continued, still in that same measured tone, that if I had any decency at all, I would stop pretending I didn't know how you felt. He tilted his head slightly. That part was fairly direct. Elena pressed both hands to her face. And then what happened? She said through her palms. And then I made a decision. She dropped her hands and looked at him. His expression hadn't changed. The same steady, unreadable focus she'd watched him aim at hostile business partners and difficult negotiations, and apparently at the drunk confession of his personal secretary on what should have been a normal Thursday evening. You made a decision, she said. I called Father Mendez. He's a licensed officiant as well as a family friend. He came to the hotel. We used one of the private rooms. You signed the documents. I signed. She stood up. The room tilted again, but she stayed upright through sheer force of will. I signed legal marriage documents while I was drunk and you let me. You were not incapacitated, Damien said. He stood as well. He was taller than she was, Mal. She'd never spent much time being bothered by that, but right now, in this room, the height difference felt significant. You were emotional. There is a difference. You knew what you were signing. I did not know what I was signing. You read the document, Elena. You read every line. I watched you do it. That doesn't mean I understood. You asked if the filing would be same day. The clerk confirmed it. You said good. He paused. Those are not the words of someone who was unaware of what they were agreeing to. She turned away from him because she needed to not be looking at his face while she processed this. She walked to the window. Miami was already awake below her. The bay glittering, the highways filling with the early morning movement of a city that never fully stopped. She was married. She was married to Damien Valverde, the man she had spent 3 years trying to be invisible around because the alternative was too complicated to consider. I want an annulment, she said to the window. Silence behind her. Elena? An annulment? She turned around. Today. This morning. I want... Sit down, he said. Something in his voice stopped her. Not the command itself, she'd ignored plenty of those over the years. It was the tone underneath it, a tone she'd only heard once or twice before, in moments when things were genuinely serious, when the situation had moved past the point of normal management. "Sit down," he said again. "Please." She sat. Damien pulled a chair to face her. He sat in it with the kind of deliberate care that meant what he was about to say had weight, and he needed her to receive it correctly. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What?" "Victor Hale has been watching you." The name landed like a stone dropping into still water. Elena knew the name Victor Hale the same way she knew most things about Damien's world, through documents she processed, calls she coordinated, and the careful habit she'd developed of understanding more than she was ever officially told. Victor Hale was Damien's most significant competitor, a man who operated in the same space as Damien did, but with fewer restraints and considerably less patience. "Watching me," she repeated. "For approximately 6 months," Damien said. "His people believe you have access to financial records from the Valverde accounts that would expose the movement of certain funds connected to a deal he was cut out of 2 years ago. Records that could essentially destroy his ability to operate in this city." Elena was very still. "And do I?" "Yes." She stared at him. "You handled the documentation for the Orion merger," he said. "You filed the financial disclosures. You had access to the subaccounts." He leaned forward slightly. "You never knew what you were looking at, but his people believe you understood exactly what those numbers meant. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "If someone has been watching me for 6 months, why did you not tell me?" "Because I was handling it." "You were handling it." "I thought I had time," he said. "I was wrong." Elena looked at this man who she had spent 3 years protecting with absolute loyalty and efficiency, and she felt something complex happen in her chest. Something that was not quite anger and not quite hurt, and was very much both at the same time. "Something changed," she said. That's why you married me last night. Something changed and you needed to—" She stopped. The thought assembled itself fully. "You needed me in your household, under your protection legally. Because if something happened to your secretary, it would be a problem. But if something happened to your wife—" "Stop," he said. "It changes the liability. It changes what resources you can deploy. It changes how your family is obligated to—" "Elena." His voice was harder now. Not cold, harder. The way steel gets harder under pressure. "Stop. That is not why." "Then tell me why," she said. "Because I am sitting here trying to understand how a man I have worked beside for 3 years could watch me confess something deeply private and then use that moment to— I did not use it. Then what would you call it?" The silence stretched between them. Outside, a boat horn sounded somewhere on the bay. A distant, ordinary sound in a morning that had become entirely unordinary. Damien looked at the floor for a moment. Just a moment. It was the closest thing to uncertainty she had ever seen on his face, and it stopped her cold. "I would call it," he said slowly, "the first decision I have made in a very long time that wasn't about protecting the Empire." Elena said nothing. "I would call it," he continued, still not quite looking at her, "what happens when a man spends 3 years noticing things he told himself he wasn't allowed to notice. And then the woman those things were about stands up in a room full of people and says exactly what he has been afraid to say himself." The morning light was very still. Elena's throat was tight. She recognized the feeling. She'd carried it long enough to know its shape. "You're telling me," she said carefully, "that you married me because you wanted to." "I am telling you," Damien said, "that the threat from Victor Hale is real, and your safety is urgent, and those things are both true at the same time as everything else I just said. I am not going to pretend the danger doesn't exist, but I'm also not going to pretend that last night was only about strategy." She looked at him for a long time. This man who ran an empire, who made decisions that moved money and men across 3 states, who she had watched negotiate, intimidate, and outmaneuver people far more powerful than herself for the last 3 years, who remembered— she suddenly recalled this, a small, sharp fact. that she took her coffee with 1 sugar and no cream because she'd mentioned once, in passing, that she was trying to cut back on dairy, and he had told the kitchen staff without being asked, who had apparently spent 3 years noticing things he told himself he wasn't allowed to notice. "My mother," Elena said. "She lives alone in Hialeah. If someone has been watching me—" "She's already been moved," Damien said. "I had 2 men at her door at 6 this morning. She's been relocated to a secured property I own in Coral Gables. She has been told there is a gas leak concern in her building." A pause. "She asked if you were all right. I told her you were with me. She said, and I want you to know I am repeating this accurately. She said, 'Good, it's about time.'" Elena made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "She's going to be insufferable about this," Elena said. "Probably," Damien agreed. Another silence, but a different kind. Lighter. The kind that happens when 2 people have been very honest about something and the air between them shifts accordingly. "I still want the annulment," Elena said. Damien nodded slowly. "I know. Not because—" She stopped, regrouped. "I'm not going to figure out what any of this means while I'm also figuring out whether someone is trying to kill me. I need those things to be separate problems." "That's reasonable. I need to get back to my apartment. I need my things. I need to call Rosa." "Your apartment isn't safe right now," he said, "and Rosa is already here." Elena blinked. "Rosa is here." She came to the building at 7 a.m. She had the security footage from the gala on her phone, and she was, in her words, not leaving until someone explained things to her. She's in the guest suite on the 4th floor. She's had breakfast. She is currently on her 3rd cup of coffee, and she is, I believe, doing what she described as composing her thoughts. Elena stood up. "I need to go talk to her." "You should also eat something," Damien said. "You haven't—" "I know I haven't eaten." She picked up her heels. "I'll eat. I'm going to go talk to my best friend first, because she has been worried about me since 2 in the morning, and she deserves a real explanation before I figure out what a real explanation even is." She paused at the door, turned back. "Do you have something I can change into?" He was already standing, already moving toward the closet with the same efficiency that she recognized because it was the same efficiency she used. The efficiency of someone who anticipated things. He pulled out a folded shirt, one of his own, white, soft from many washings, and handed it to her. Their fingers touched during the exchange. Neither of them acknowledged it. Elena walked out of the bedroom carrying his shirt and her shoes and 3 years' worth of feelings she didn't know what to do with, moving through a penthouse she'd never been in before, in a marriage she didn't remember agreeing to, toward a best friend who deserved the truth, and a problem that was significantly larger than she had understood when she woke up 20 minutes ago. The morning was barely started. She had a feeling it was going to be a very long day. What she did not know, what none of them knew yet, was that 6 floors below, a man in a gray sedan had been watching the building since before dawn, and that the phone he was holding had just received a message with her name on it, and that the message contained 2 words. "We move tonight." Rosa Delgado had been Elena's best friend for 11 years, and in that time she had seen Elena handle things that would have broken most people. She had seen Elena sit at her mother's hospital bedside for 3 days straight without sleeping. She had seen Elena negotiate a contract dispute with a room full of men who didn't think she belonged there. She had seen Elena pack up her old apartment in 40 minutes flat after her ex-boyfriend told her she was too much work, and do it without crying once. But she had never seen Elena walk into a room wearing a man's oversized shirt, carrying her heels in one hand, and looking like she had just survived something she hadn't fully processed yet. Rosa stood up from the chair beside the guest suite window, so fast she knocked her coffee mug sideways. "Tell me everything," Rosa said. "Right now, from the beginning, don't skip anything." Elena closed the door behind her. She looked at the mug rolling on the table, the coffee spreading across the white surface, and she thought about how she needed to deal with that. And then she thought about how that instinct, to fix, to organize, to manage, had been the engine of her entire professional life. She thought about that for exactly 2 seconds, and then she grabbed a hand towel from the bathroom doorway and threw it over the spill. "I got married last night," Elena said. Rosa stared at her. "I got married Elena continued, because apparently she needed to hear herself say it again. To Damien Valverde, my boss, the man whose dry cleaning I have scheduled for pickup every second Tuesday for the past 3 years. I got married to him last night at some point after my third glass of champagne, and apparently before I was drunk enough to not know what I was signing, but also apparently while I was drunk enough that I have zero memory of agreeing to it. Rosa sat back down, slowly, like her legs had made the decision before the rest of her caught up. The footage, Rosa said, on my phone. I thought I was seeing things. You weren't. Elena. Rosa's voice dropped. That footage shows you smiling. Elena stopped. You were smiling, Rosa said again. Not a confused smile, not a polite smile. You looked happy, Elena. I have the video. I've watched it 4 times, trying to figure out if you were being coerced, and every time I watch it, you look like someone who is exactly where she wants to be. The room was very quiet. Elena sat down on the edge of the bed. The shirt she was wearing smelled like him, cedar and that dark, expensive cologne she'd ordered from Milan 3 Christmases ago, and that was a problem she was choosing not to deal with yet. I said something to him, Elena said. During the dinner, I told him... She stopped. She tried again. I told him that I was tired, and that the only person I'd ever wanted to stand beside was him. Rosa said nothing. Her expression was doing something complicated. Don't, Elena said. I'm not saying anything. You're thinking very loudly. I've been thinking very loudly about this for approximately 2 years, Rosa said. So you're going to let me have 10 seconds. Elena let her have 10 seconds. Okay, Rosa said. Okay, but Elena, there's something else. There's a reason I called you 11 times last night, and it wasn't just because of the footage. She reached for her phone, pulled up something, turned the screen toward Elena. After I saw the ceremony footage, I went back through the other cameras, the ones covering the parking structure and the exterior. Elena took the phone. The footage was time-stamped 11:23 p.m., roughly 30 minutes after the ceremony. Exterior camera facing the east entrance. A dark SUV, no plates. A man leaning against it, face partially obscured, talking into a phone. And beside him, close enough to be unmistakable, a woman Elena recognized immediately. Sandra Voss, Damien's head of legal operations. The woman who had been with the Valverde organization for 8 years. That's Sandra, Elena said. That's Sandra, Rosa confirmed. Standing outside a gala she was supposed to still be inside, talking to a man in a car with no license plates, 23 minutes after your marriage was filed. Elena looked at the image for a long time. Sandra Voss was meticulous, composed, and had always been professionally pleasant to Elena in the way that could mean either genuine warmth or calculated courtesy. She handled the organization's most sensitive legal matters. She knew more about the Valverde financial architecture than almost anyone. She also, Elena realized now, would have known about the Orion merger files. Send me this footage, Elena said. Already sent. Rosa paused. Elena, what is going on? And I mean, what is actually going on? Not the version where you woke up married to your boss, the underneath version. Elena looked at her best friend and made a decision. She told her everything. The whole story. Victor Hale, the financial documents, 6 months of surveillance, the reason Damien had moved her mother to Coral Gables at 6 in the morning. She told it fast and flat and without decoration, because there wasn't time for anything else, and Rosa had always been the kind of person who needed facts before she needed comfort. When Elena finished, Rosa was quiet for a moment, processing. So someone in Damien's own organization has been feeding Victor Hale information, Rosa said. That's what the footage suggests. And you are now legally married to the man those people are trying to destroy. Yes. And there are people watching this building. Apparently, Rosa looked at the window. At the Miami skyline beyond it, bright and indifferent. I want to go home, she said. I know. I'm not going to, she added, but I want to be clear that I want to. She picked up her coffee mug, now empty, the spill absorbed by the towel. What do we do? Before Elena could answer, the door opened. She had not heard a knock. There had not been one. Damien walked in, and he was not alone. Behind him was a man Elena recognized as Marco Reyes, the head of Valverde's private security, a quiet, broad-shouldered man in his 40s who moved like someone who had spent a significant portion of his life preparing for things to go wrong. Behind Marco was another man Elena didn't recognize, younger, tense. His eyes were already moving around the room before he fully entered it. Damien stopped when he saw Rosa. "Miss Delgado," he said, not unkindly, but with the specific tone he used when a situation had expanded beyond what he'd planned for. "Good morning." "It is not a good morning," Rosa said, with impressive composure, for someone who had been awake for what was probably 20 hours, and had just learned her best friend had accidentally married a man whose enemies wanted her dead. "But thank you for the breakfast." "We have a problem," Damien said. He was looking at Elena, not Rosa. He held something out, a tablet, a video pulled up and paused. "We need to look at this together." Elena recognized the footage immediately. It was the same exterior camera footage Rosa had sent her, the same parking structure, Sandra Voss and the dark SUV. "You already found this," Elena said. "My security team flagged it 40 minutes ago." He set the tablet down on the table. "I need to know if you saw anything last night, anything involving Sandra. Before the ceremony, after, any point during the evening." Elena thought back. She tried to separate what she actually remembered from what had been reconstructed through the footage Rosa showed her, because memory was unreliable enough without adding champagne and emotional upheaval to the mix. "She was at the dinner," Elena said. "She left early. I remember thinking it was unusual because she almost never leaves a formal event before Damien does." She stopped. Something else surfaced. "She asked me a question." "What question?" "She asked me if I'd finished filing the quarterly disclosures for the Orion accounts." Elena met Damien's eyes. "I told her I'd submitted everything digitally, and the backup copies were on the server." A pause. "She asked me if there were physical copies." The silence that followed had a specific density to it. Marco shifted his weight slightly. The younger man in the doorway stopped looking around the room and started looking at Elena. "I told her no," Elena continued. "I said everything was digital, but that's not true." She kept her eyes on Damien. "You asked me to keep physical copies of all major merger documentation. 2 sets. One in the office safe, one off-site," Damien said, "in a storage unit in Doral, that you have me access monthly to update." She paused. "Sandra doesn't know about the off-site copies. Nobody in the office does except you and me." Marco spoke for the first time. "She reported to Hale that all documentation was digital," he said. "If Hale's people try to pull the server copies, they'll find them," Damien said. "But they won't find everything." He looked at Elena. "Sandra doesn't know what she doesn't have." "How long?" Elena asked. "How long do you think she's been working for him?" "I don't know yet." Damien's jaw was tight. Elena had learned to read that particular tension. It meant he was controlling something. Anger, most likely. Or the thing that lived underneath anger in people like Damien, which was the specific pain of being betrayed by someone trusted. 8 years, Elena said quietly. "Sandra has been with your family for 8 years." "I know." "Does your mother know?" Something crossed his face. "No, not yet." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We can't tell Sandra we know. If we move on her too fast, Hale will know we found the leak, and he'll change his approach. We need to—" "Elena," Damien's voice had an edge to it, not sharp, a warning edge. "Let my team handle the security assessment." She looked at him. "I'm not one of your staff anymore," she said. It came out steady. "You made sure of that last night." The room had a charged stillness. Marco found something very interesting to look at on the far wall. Rosa took a slow sip of her empty coffee mug with great concentration. Damien looked at Elena for a moment with an expression she had no good name for. It was not the face he used in negotiations. It was not the face he used with his family. It was something else. Something with more surface area, more exposure. "You're right," he said. It was 2 words, 2 flat, simple words. But they landed differently than she expected. Because Damien Valverde did not say those words easily or often, and she had spent 3 years watching him find other ways around them. "The storage unit in Doral," she said, We need someone there before Hale figures out the physical copies exist. Already sent, Marco said. Good. She stood up straighter. And I want to see the full 6 months of surveillance reports on my movements. Whatever your people compiled tracking Hale's surveillance of me, I want to read it. Marco glanced at Damien. She gets whatever she asked for, Damien said, without hesitation. Marco nodded once and stepped out. The younger man at the door, whom nobody had introduced, was still watching Elena. She turned to look at him directly. Who are you? She asked. He looked at Damien, who said, Felix Ruiz. He works for me in a capacity that doesn't have an official job title. Intelligence? Elena guessed. Felix almost smiled. Something like that. Then I have a question for you, Elena said. Victor Hale's people have been watching me for 6 months. I live alone, I don't vary my routine much, and I don't have the kind of security infrastructure that makes surveillance difficult. She crossed her arms. What took them so long to move? Felix glanced at Damien again, and this time Damien gave a very slight nod. They weren't sure what you had, Felix said. For a long time they thought you might be aware of the files and deliberately protecting them. A willing collaborator who could be flipped or pressured. When they determined you genuinely didn't know what you were handling, they decided they could just take it, Elena finished. They decided, Felix said carefully, that you were manageable. The words sat in the room like something that had been left out in the sun too long. Manageable. Elena had been called many things in her professional life. Efficient, reliable, indispensable, once, by a senior partner who'd said it in a tone that was meant to be a compliment. She had never once been called manageable and had it feel like anything other than what it was. A calculation made by someone who looked at her and saw a problem with an easy solution. Let them keep thinking that, she said. Rosa made a small sound from across the room. Elena didn't look at her, but she heard it. The specific sound Rosa made when she was watching Elena shift into a gear that Rosa had only seen a handful of times, and which always meant something was about to happen that nobody had planned for. Elena, Damien said, carefully. I'm not suggesting anything reckless, she said. I'm saying that if Victor Hale's people believe I'm manageable, that's information we can use. They'll be expecting a frightened secretary hiding inside her boss's building. They will not be expecting— No, Damien said. I haven't finished the sentence. You were about to suggest putting yourself in a position where Hale's people could access you as a way of feeding them false information or drawing them into a controlled situation. He said it flatly. No. She turned to face him fully. How did you know that's what I was going to say? Because it's what I would do, he said. And you've been watching me work for 3 years. Another silence. A different kind from the ones before. This one had something almost like recognition in it. Two people who thought the same way, who had been in adjacent rooms for years, finally standing in the same space at the same time. It's a good idea, Felix said quietly. Damien looked at him. It is a good idea, Felix repeated, not backing down. If we move on Sandra too fast, Hale disappears and we're back to zero. But if we give Hale's people something to chase, something that seems like the missing documentation, we can control the timeline. We can pick the ground. She's not trained for field operations, Damien said. No, Elena said, but I know every financial document in that storage unit by heart. I know what the real files look like, and I know how to create something that looks real enough to move Hale's people without actually giving them anything. She paused. You need a body and a brain in that room, Damien. You have plenty of bodies. I'm the only brain who knows those files. Damien looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was still tight. She could see the cost of what he was considering in the set of his shoulders. The tension of a man who was used to being the one who walked into dangerous rooms, now looking at the only person in his orbit who understood the operational details well enough to be useful, and hating the math of it. If anything goes wrong, he started. I know what to do if something goes wrong, Elena said. I've been managing your crises for 3 years. I know your protocols better than half your security team. Managing documents is different from managing Damien. She said his name the way she'd said it 100 times in offices and over phones and through closed doors, calm, direct, cutting through to the point. Do you trust my competence or not? The question surprised him. She could see it. It was not a question he'd expected because it was not a question she'd ever asked before. For 3 years, she had simply demonstrated her competence and let him draw his own conclusions. She had never demanded acknowledgement of it, had never required him to say it out loud. He said it out loud now. Yes, he said, I trust your competence. Then let me work. He looked at the floor, a gesture she was beginning to understand meant he was accepting something he would have preferred to refuse. We do this with a full security detail. You are not alone in that building for a single minute. Agreed. And we do it in stages. Nothing moves until Felix and Marco have built a complete picture of Hale's current surveillance positions. Also agreed. And, he said, and his voice dropped slightly, you eat something first. Rosa made the sound again. Elena chose to continue not looking at her. Fine, Elena said. I'll eat something. What happened next moved fast, the way dangerous things tend to when they've been building for a long time. By noon, Marco's team had confirmed what Elena had suspected since she saw the storage unit footage. Hale's people had already sent someone to the Doral location. They'd arrived at 9 a.m., found the locks unchanged, and spent 40 minutes conducting what appeared to be a visual reconnaissance of the building exterior. They hadn't gone inside. Yet. By 2 in the afternoon, Felix had compiled a detailed file on Sandra Voss's movements over the past 6 months, and the picture it painted was methodical and deeply unsettling. Small things. Coffee meetings with people outside her usual professional circle. Encrypted messages sent from her personal phone during office hours. 3 separate occasions where she had accessed file areas her clearance level technically permitted, but her job function didn't require. 8 years. The woman had been patient for 8 years. Elena read the file twice at the kitchen table in Damien's penthouse, working through a plate of food she didn't taste because eating felt like an obstacle between her and the information, and she needed the information more than she needed lunch. Damien sat across from her. He was on a call. Low voice, clipped sentences, clearly dealing with the operational fallout of the morning. She could track his half of the conversation without trying. She had learned his shorthand the same way she'd learned everything else about him. By necessity, over time, without being asked. At 3:15, Rosa came to find her. I have to go, Rosa said. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with her bag over her shoulder, and an expression that meant she had made a decision she wasn't entirely comfortable with but had committed to. I have to get back to my apartment and get to work. I have clients who... It's not safe, Elena said. I know. Rosa's voice was level. But I'm not the one they're watching. I'm not the one with the files. If I go back to my normal life and act like everything is normal, I'm the least useful target in this situation. She paused. Felix already gave me a number to call if anything feels wrong. Elena looked at her. When did you talk to Felix? About 40 minutes ago. A pause. He's thorough. I respect that. Elena stood up and walked to Rosa and hugged her. Rosa hugged back, the kind of hug that carried weight, that said things that couldn't be said quickly. You be careful, Rosa said into Elena's shoulder. And I mean physically careful, not just smart careful. I will. And Elena? Rosa pulled back. She was looking at her with 11 years of friendship arranged clearly on her face. That man looked at you 3 times during the conversation this morning without you noticing. Each time was when you were saying something that proved you were right. She picked up her bag again. I'm just saying. She was gone before Elena could respond. Damien had ended his call. He was watching Elena from across the kitchen. She's good, he said, about Rosa. She's the best person I know, Elena said. She went back to the file. He went back to whatever fire he was managing. They sat across the table from each other in the particular silence of people who have learned how to occupy the same space productively. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt almost ordinary. It was at 4:47 p.m. that Felix came into the kitchen with his phone in his hand and an expression that erased ordinary immediately. We have a problem, Felix said. Elena put down the file. The team at Doral, Felix said. They just called in. He looked at Damien, then back at Elena. The storage unit has already been accessed. Not today. Sometime in the last 72 hours, someone got inside. Elena's stomach dropped. The physical copies, still there, Felix said quickly. Everything accounted for. Whoever went in didn't take anything. He paused. They left something instead. He turned his phone around. A photograph. The interior of the storage unit, everything in order, files in their correct places. And on top of the main document box, placed with deliberate precision, a single playing card. The Queen of Spades. Elena stared at the photograph. Victor Hale's signature, Damien said. His voice had gone very flat and very quiet. The voice he used when he was past the point of managing his reaction. He's been in that unit. He knows the physical copies exist. He's known for at least 3 days. He looked up from the phone. And he didn't take the files. Because he doesn't want the files, Elena said. The understanding arrived whole and cold. He wants me to go get them. Damien's eyes met hers. He knows I'm the only one who knows what's in there, she said. He wants me to walk into that building because that's the only way he gets what he actually wants. She set down the surveillance report. He's not after the documents. She met Damien's gaze directly. He's after me. The kitchen was very still. And then Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. An expression moved across his face that she had never seen before. Not in 3 years, not in any meeting or negotiation or crisis she'd managed beside him. It was something raw and controlled at the same time. Something that belonged to the version of him that existed before the empire, before the reputation. He answered it. Mother, he said. A pause. Elena watched his face. When did she arrive? He said. Another pause, longer. No, don't let her leave. I'm on my way. He hung up. He looked at Felix. He looked at Elena. Isabella Valverde is at the Coral Gables property, he said. Elena knew the name. Damien's mother. The woman who had built the Valverde name before Damien was old enough to understand what it meant. She's asking for Elena, Damien said. Elena felt the shift happen in the room, the way a temperature drops before a storm, the way pressure changes before something breaks. She knows about the marriage, Elena said. She knew before this morning. His voice was careful. She's been waiting to say something until she understood the situation. He looked at Elena steadily. What she wants to say to you, I cannot predict, but I want you to know, before you go in that room, that whatever she tells you about why this marriage happened, about what it means or doesn't mean, my answer to you this morning was true. Elena held his gaze for a moment. I know, she said. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't decided to trust it yet. Trust was a slower process than recognition, and she knew the difference. But she said it anyway, because it was the truest thing available in that moment, and she was very tired of pretending otherwise. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She had no idea that in the 3 minutes it would take them to reach the elevator, a message would arrive on Sandra Voss's encrypted phone, confirming that Elena Marquez had been identified as a direct threat to Victor Hale's operation, and that Victor Hale had upgraded the order, not to bring her in anymore, to make sure she never made it to that storage unit at all. The Coral Gables property was not what Elena had expected. She had imagined something fortified, something that announced its own security. Gates, cameras positioned obviously, the kind of visible infrastructure that said this is a protected place. What she found instead was a Spanish-style house on a quiet street lined with old banyan trees, the kind of house that looked like someone's grandmother lived there, with terracotta roof tiles and a front garden that needed trimming and windows that were slightly too small for the facade. Everything about it was designed to look like nothing. She recognized the strategy immediately. It was the same strategy Damien used in business. The most dangerous things never announce themselves. Marco pulled the car into the side entrance. The drive from downtown had taken 22 minutes, and nobody had spoken for most of it. Damien sat beside her in the back seat with his phone in his hand, reading something, his jaw still carrying that particular tension she'd cataloged this morning. Felix was in the front passenger seat watching the mirrors with the specific attentiveness of someone who had been trained to treat every route as a potential problem. Elena had spent the drive looking out the window and thinking about the Queen of Spades. Not the card itself, the decision it represented. Victor Hale had sent men into that storage unit 3 days ago. He'd had access to the physical documents for 72 hours and had taken nothing. He'd left a signal instead, a calling card designed to be found, designed to communicate something specific. I know where your secrets are. Now let's see what you do. It was a patience move, the kind made by someone who understood that people under pressure make mistakes, and that the best way to expose those mistakes was to apply pressure deliberately and then wait. She was still thinking about this when the car stopped and Marco opened her door and the smell of cut grass and salt air came in from outside, ordinary and incongruous, like the afternoon had not received the memo about what kind of day this was. The inside of the house was cool and quiet. Someone had set up a monitoring station in what had probably been a dining room. Two men Elena didn't know sitting in front of laptop screens, barely looking up when Damien entered. Her mother's overnight bag was visible through a doorway at the end of the hall, sitting on a made bed with the kind of careful placement that suggested someone had carried it in and set it down gently. Her mother was in the kitchen. Carmen Marquez was 63 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, and had been managing crises since before Elena was born. She had raised Elena alone after Elena's father left when Elena was 7, working 2 jobs for 4 years, and she had done it without ever once making Elena feel like a burden or a reason for complaint. She was the most pragmatic person Elena had ever known, and she showed love the same way she showed everything else, directly, without decoration, and occasionally in a way that felt slightly like being corrected. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and when Elena walked in, she looked up and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you, Mom." "Sit down." Carmen pushed the chair across from her, out with one foot. "There's tea." "I don't need tea." "Sit down and have tea," Carmen said, in the tone that was not actually a suggestion. Elena sat down. Damien stopped in the kitchen doorway. Carmen looked at him with an expression that was entirely different from the one she'd used on Elena. Assessing, unhurried, the kind of look a woman gives a man when she has already decided what she thinks of him and is checking whether the evidence supports her conclusion. "You're taller than I expected," Carmen said. "Mrs. Marquez," Damien said. "Sit down," Carmen said. "Both of you. I've been sitting in this house for 5 hours, and nobody has told me anything real, and I would like to have a conversation with my daughter and her husband before whatever is happening continues to happen." Damien sat down without argument, which told Elena something. She wasn't sure what yet. Carmen poured tea. She did it with the unhurried precision of someone who understood that some conversations needed the ritual of ordinary things to anchor them. "Your mother called me," Carmen said to Damien. Elena looked up. "Isabella Valverde called me this morning," Carmen continued calmly, "at approximately 7:30, before the men arrived at my door." She set the teapot down. "She told me that her son had made a decision last night that she wanted me to hear about from a member of the family before I heard about it another way." A pause. "She told me my daughter was safe and that she would remain safe. And she told me that she hoped, given time, I would understand the circumstances." Elena looked at Damien. He was looking at his tea. "You told your mother," Elena said. "She found out," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "The county filing is a public record," he said. "My family has people who monitor public records involving the Valverde name." A pause. "She found out within 2 hours of the filing." "And you didn't call her yourself?" He was quiet for a moment. "No." Carmen was watching this exchange with the expression of someone following a tennis match who already knows who's going to win. "She wants to meet you," Carmen said to Elena. "Isabella Valverde. She asked me to tell you, when I saw you, that she would like to speak with you privately, before you speak with her son about whatever it is you're planning to do next." "She's here," Elena said. "In this house." "She arrived about 40 minutes before you did," Carmen said. "She's in the back sitting room." A pause. "She brought a lawyer." The word landed with specific weight. Elena looked at Damien again. Something in his face had shifted. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent. The face of a man who had calculated several scenarios and was now determining which one he was in. "The annulment," Elena said quietly. "Elena, she brought a lawyer because she wants to make sure the annulment happens before anything else does." Elena kept her voice even with some effort. "She wants to make sure I don't—" She stopped. reorganized. She's protecting the family. She's doing what she's always done, Damien said. His voice was careful, controlled, which is act before she has all the information. Maybe she has enough information, Elena said. Elena. His voice dropped. Not a command, a request. Let me handle my mother. Your mother brought a lawyer to a house where my mother is staying for her own safety, Elena said. I think I should probably be in that room. Carmen set down her teacup. I'll get more hot water, she said, and stood up and moved to the stove with the particular tact of a woman who understood when her presence was no longer the point. Elena stood. Damien stood with her. They walked down the hall together, not touching, not speaking, and it occurred to Elena that this was actually the most time she had spent in physical proximity to Damien Valverde in 3 years of working beside him. More time than any business trip, any late-night crisis call, any working dinner. All of that time, and she had always maintained the precise professional distance that her job required. The distance that said, I am here to be useful, not to be present. She had spent 3 years perfecting that distance. One night had erased it. The back sitting room had 2 windows facing a garden that probably looked pleasant in better circumstances. Isabella Valverde was seated in a high-backed chair near the window. A woman in her mid-60s, dark-haired, immaculately composed, with the kind of stillness that came from decades of being the most powerful person in rooms that didn't always know it. Beside her sat a man in a gray suit with a briefcase on his knee, who had the specific, careful blankness of a family attorney who had seen a great deal and reacted to none of it. Isabella looked at Elena when she entered, not at Damien, at Elena. Mrs. Valverde, Elena said. Sit down, Isabella said. Her voice was measured, low, accented with the particular cadence of a woman who had learned English as a second language and had since surpassed most people who'd spoken it their entire lives. Elena sat. Damien sat beside her. She was aware of him, the slight shift of his weight, the way he placed his hands flat on his knees, a gesture she'd seen him use in meetings when he was preparing to listen to something he disagreed with. I want to begin, Isabella said, by telling you what I know. All right, Elena said. I know that my son made a decision last night that he did not consult me about. A pause. No look at Damien. Eyes entirely on Elena. I know that the decision was made under circumstances that I find irregular. I know that there is a threat to this family from Victor Hale that has been developing for some time, and that this threat has now become attached to you in a way that makes you either an asset or a liability depending on how the next several days unfold. Elena waited. What I do not know, Isabella continued, is you. She let that sit. I know your employment record, she said. I know your mother's name and your professional history and the fact that you have managed my son's life with exceptional competence for 3 years. What I do not know is what you want. At this particular moment, Elena said, I want to keep people safe and resolve a threat that I apparently became part of without knowing it. And after that? Elena looked at her steadily. I haven't gotten there yet. Something moved in Isabella's expression. Not approval, something more guarded than approval. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of one pragmatic woman identifying another. There are documents, Isabella said. She nodded to the attorney, who opened his briefcase. Mother, Damien said. These are annulment papers, Isabella said. Her voice didn't change. Standard procedure, no fault, clean filing. The marriage is dissolved without public record of the circumstances. She looked at Elena. I want you to understand that I am not bringing these to you as a threat. I am bringing them to you because I want you to know they exist, and that if you choose to sign them, the Valverde family will ensure that your safety and your mother's safety are maintained regardless. The attorney set the papers on the table between them. Elena looked at them. Damien's hands had gone very still on his knees. You came here to offer me an exit, Elena said to Isabella. I came here to give you a choice, Isabella said, which is something my son should have given you last night. The room was absolutely quiet. Elena looked at the papers. She looked at the clean, official language of them. The kind of language designed to make complicated things look simple, to reduce decisions with significant weight to a series of blanks requiring a signature. Then she looked up at Isabella and said, "Tell me about Victor Hale." Isabella blinked. It was small, barely perceptible, but Elena had spent 3 years developing the habit of noticing small things, and she caught it. "What do you want to know?" Isabella said. "The history," Elena said. "The real history. Not the version in the financial documents I processed, not the version Damien summarized for me this morning. The version you know." She leaned forward slightly. "Because you brought a lawyer and annulment papers to a house where you've known me for 11 minutes, which means you're afraid of something specific. And I don't think you're afraid of me. I think you're afraid of what Hale can do if this situation isn't resolved quickly." She paused. "So tell me what you know." The silence stretched. Then Isabella said, "Leave us." The attorney stood immediately, gathered his briefcase with practiced efficiency, and was out of the room before Damien could object. Damien looked at his mother. She looked back at him with an expression that was not unkind but was absolutely non-negotiable. "You too," she said. "Mother—" Damien. One word. The weight of 30 years of being his mother was in it. He stood. He looked at Elena. She gave him the smallest nod. Barely a movement, just enough to register. He left, pulling the door partially closed behind him. Isabella looked at Elena for a long moment after he was gone. Something in her posture changed. Not softened, exactly. Settled. Like a woman who had been performing composure and could now simply have it. "Victor Hale and my husband were partners," Isabella said. "Before Damien took over the organization, before my husband died." Elena kept her face still. "They built the early infrastructure of this enterprise together," Isabella continued, "for 11 years. And then my husband discovered that Victor had been systematically redirecting funds from their joint operations into accounts that my husband had no access to or knowledge of." She paused. "When my husband confronted him, Victor arranged for 3 of our family's most trusted people to be arrested on charges that Victor manufactured." Another pause. "My husband died 8 months later. The official cause was a heart attack. I have never fully accepted that." The air in the room changed texture. "Victor Hale believes this organization owes him half of everything it became," Isabella said. "He has believed this for 12 years. He has been patient in the way that people are patient when they are planning rather than waiting." She looked at Elena directly. "The Orion merger files are not what he's actually after. He has his own copies of the relevant financial data. He was part of the original architecture. He knows where everything is." Elena's mind was moving fast now. "Then what?" "He wants to destroy Damien's legitimacy," Isabella said. "Not his operation. His standing. Among the people who make the decisions about who operates in this city and who doesn't." She leaned forward slightly. "There are people inside this organization, people who have been loyal for years, who Victor has been quietly cultivating, reminding them of old grievances, old debts, suggesting that Damien's leadership is not what his father's was." She stopped. "He doesn't want the files, Miss Marquez. He wants the names on them. He wants proof that certain transactions were approved by Damien personally, so that he can take that proof to the people whose respect Damien needs most, and use it to suggest that Damien is not the man his father was." Elena sat with this for a moment. "Sandra Voss," she said. Isabella nodded once. Tight, like it cost her. "Sandra was loyal to my husband," Isabella said. "Not to Damien. She tolerated Damien's leadership because my husband chose him, but Victor found her grief and her doubt, and he used them." A pause. "She has been feeding him information for approximately 2 years, not 6 months. 2 years. Damien thinks it's been—" "Damien knows what I've allowed him to know," Isabella said, "because I have been trying to manage this without involving him in a way that would cause him to act before the time was right." She stopped. "I was wrong to do that. I understand that now." Elena looked at this woman, this composed, deliberate, iron-spined woman who had been carrying a secret war for 2 years inside her own organization while also burying her suspicions about her husband's death, and watching her son build something he didn't fully know was already being dismantled. "You've been protecting him," Elena said. I've been making the same mistake everyone makes when they love someone, Isabella said, deciding what they can and can't handle. The statement landed with enough weight that neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Elena said, "What did Victor do 2 years ago that made Sandra turn?" Isabella was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. The kind of quiet that meant the answer was significant. He showed her a document, Isabella said. A record of a financial transaction from 11 years ago. A transaction that appeared to implicate my husband in the original diversion of funds. In Sandra's eyes, it suggested that the man she was loyal to was not the innocent party she believed him to be. A pause. The document is a fabrication. I know this because I know what my husband's records actually say. But Sandra believed it, and once she believed it, Victor had her. Where's the document now? Victor has it. He has been using it to keep Sandra compliant. If she stops cooperating, he releases it. It destroys my husband's name. Isabella's voice didn't shake, but it was very controlled in a way that suggested it was choosing not to. It destroys the story that this family has told about itself. Elena sat very still. The whole picture was assembling itself now, yet the real picture. Not the version she'd been given this morning, not the version visible in financial documents. The picture underneath. Victor Hale hadn't been building toward a single move. He'd been building toward a complete collapse. Financial, operational, and reputational, all at once, using people who were already inside. And at the center of his plan, apparently, was Elena. "Why me?" Elena said. "Specifically, why use me as the trigger?" Isabella looked at her. "Because you're the only person in this organization who has consistent access to Damien without being part of the power structure. You are not a threat, in Victor's assessment. You are not protected by the internal politics. You are manageable," Elena said. The word tasted worse the second time. "In his assessment," Isabella said, and something in her tone made it clear what she thought of Victor Hale's assessment. "The documents in the Doral storage unit," Elena said slowly. "The real ones. If someone with the right knowledge looked at them, someone who understood what the sub-account structures meant, they'd see the evidence that the transaction Sandra was shown was fabricated. They'd see the actual record of where the money moved and who authorized it." Isabella was very still. "That's what he's afraid of," Elena said. "Not that I'll protect the documents. He knows he can work around the documents eventually. He's afraid that I'll understand them." She looked at Isabella directly. "He's afraid that I'll figure out what they prove." "You already have," Isabella said quietly. The room was silent, and then Elena's phone vibrated on the table between them. A text from a number she didn't recognize, 5 words that made every hair on her arms stand up. "We have Rosa. Come alone." Elena picked up the phone with a hand that was not entirely steady. She read it again, 3 times, as though repetition might change what it said. Rosa had left the building 4 hours ago to go back to her apartment. She had Felix's number. She was supposed to be in her normal life, unremarkable, the least useful target in the situation. "We have Rosa. Come alone." Elena stood up. "What is it?" Isabella said. Sharp. Reading Elena's face. Elena showed her the phone without speaking. Isabella's composure did something Elena had not expected. It cracked. Just for a moment. Just long enough for something human and frightened to show through before the control came back. "Damien!" Isabella said, loudly, immediately. He came through the door fast enough that she understood he had not been far. Probably just outside. Probably listening for exactly this kind of sound in his mother's voice. He looked at Elena. She held out the phone. She watched him read it. She watched his face do the thing she'd seen it do once before today. Move through something in a space too fast and too private to fully follow, and come out the other side somewhere colder and more focused. "When did she leave?" he said. 4 hours ago, Elena said. "She took a car service back to her apartment. Felix gave her a contact number." "Felix!" Damien turned. Felix was already in the doorway. Damien held up the phone. Felix looked at it and reached for his own phone simultaneously. "I'm on it," Felix said, and was gone. Elena stood in the center of the room, and she felt something she had been holding at a controlled distance all day break through the control. Not panic. She did not have the luxury of panic, and she knew it. But something close. The specific terror of realizing that the people around you are in danger because of you. That your name on a document, your existence in a situation, has made someone who had nothing to do with this into a target. Rosa, who had watched Elena's back for 11 years. Rosa, who had come to this building at 7 in the morning because she was frightened for her friend. Rosa, who had sat across from her with a coffee mug and said, "You be careful," and that man looked at you 3 times this morning. "I have to go," Elena said. "You are not going anywhere alone," Damien said. "The message says—" "The message is designed to get you into an uncontrolled position," Damien said. His voice was hard and fast. "Victor Hale does not want to negotiate. He wants you isolated." "I know that," Elena said. Her own voice had gone somewhere unfamiliar. Stripped down, no performance in it. "I know exactly what it is, and Rosa is still wherever he's put her because of me, and I am not going to sit in this house and—" "Elena." He stepped forward and put both hands on her shoulders, and the physical contact stopped her the way a sudden sound stops a person, not because it hurt, but because it was unexpected and immediate and real. "I know," he said. His voice was different now, too. The hardness still there, but something under it. "I know. We're going to get her back. I need you to trust me for the next 60 seconds and not make a unilateral decision." She looked at him, his hands on her shoulders, his face close, the distance she'd spent 3 years maintaining reduced to nothing. 60 seconds, she said. "Felix will have her location in 60 seconds, he said. He put a tracker on the car service app she used. If her phone is still on— Felix appeared in the doorway. "Phone is off," he said. "But the car service driver's GPS still logged the drop point. She made it home. He dropped her at her building at 4:22 p.m. He paused. "Her building has exterior cameras. I'm pulling the feed now." Another pause. 2 seconds. "Got her. 4:51 p.m. She came back out of the building. She was talking to someone on the sidewalk, a man. She knew him. She was smiling." He turned the phone around to show the still frame. "Recognize him?" Elena looked. The man on the sidewalk outside Rosa's building was someone she had met twice. Once at a Valverde company event 18 months ago, and once in a brief introduction in the lobby of the Valverde Tower on a Tuesday morning when he'd been waiting for a meeting she'd scheduled. His name was Daniel Rice. He was Victor Hale's chief of operations. And Rosa had been smiling at him because Rosa, who knew none of this, who had been sent home to safety 4 hours ago, had no way of knowing who he was or what his presence on her sidewalk meant. Elena looked at the still frame for a long time. Then she looked at Damien. "She didn't know," Elena said. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness cost something. "She had no idea." "No," Damien said. "He's had her for over an hour," Elena said. "Yes." She turned to Felix. "What do we have? What do we actually have? Not what we're building toward. Not the long game plan. Right now, tonight, what can we move?" Felix looked at Damien. Damien nodded. 4 security personnel in vehicles within a 4-block radius of the financial district, Felix said. 2 at Doral, Marco, and 2 others here, and me. "And me," Elena said. "Elena." "And me," she said again, "because I am the only person in this building who knows what Victor Hale's people think I have, and I am the only person who can walk into a controlled exchange and make him believe he's getting what he wants." She looked at Damien. "You said this morning that you trust my competence." "I do." "Then trust it now." She picked up her phone. "I'm going to respond to this message. I'm going to tell them I'll come. And then we are going to make absolutely sure that when I walk into whatever room Victor Hale has prepared for this conversation, I am not walking in as the manageable secretary he's been underestimating for 6 months." She typed the response. Simple. 4 words. "Tell me where." "Tonight." She hit send before she could think better of it. The phone vibrated almost immediately. An address in the Wynwood district. A warehouse building she didn't recognize. A time, 10 p.m. And one final line that made the decision irreversible in a way that no amount of planning or strategy could undo. "Come alone, or we send her back in pieces." Elena read it, showed it to nobody, set the phone down on the table. She had been managing Damien Valverde's empire for 3 years from behind a desk. She had processed the paperwork of a world she hadn't fully understood, organized the machinery of something she'd been kept carefully adjacent to. She was done being adjacent. She looked at the address on her phone. She looked at Damien, who was watching her with an expression she had no previous category for, something that was fear and faith in equal measure, from a man who had not let himself feel either of those things easily or often. "Tell me everything you know about that building," she said. And the woman who had spent 3 years being invisible walked straight into the most dangerous night of her life, with her eyes completely open. They had 4 hours. Felix spread a satellite image of the Wynwood warehouse across the kitchen table, and Elena stood over it with her arms crossed and her eyes moving across the layout, the way she moved across a complex financial document, systematically looking for the thing that didn't fit, the detail that revealed the structure underneath the structure. The building was 3 stories. Ground floor had 2 vehicle entrances on the south side and a loading dock on the east. The upper floors had been used for art storage before the property changed hands 14 months ago. Felix had pulled the permit records in under 6 minutes. The new owner was a shell company registered in Delaware, 2 layers of corporate structure between the name on the paperwork and anyone real. "Victor's been using this building for at least a year," Elena said. "Probably longer," Felix said. "The permit records show renovation work on the interior 8 months ago, climate control upgrades, security system installation." "He planned for this," Damien said. He was standing at the far end of the table, not looking at the map, looking at Elena. She was aware of it the way you're aware of a sound at the edge of hearing. Present, not intrusive, impossible to fully ignore. "He planned for something," Elena said. "Maybe not this specifically, but he's been building toward a controlled confrontation for a long time." She pointed to the northeast corner of the building. "This is where they'll have Rosa. Interior room, no windows. Away from both vehicle entrances so she can't signal anyone outside." She looked at Felix. "How many people does Hale typically move with?" "For something like this?" 6 to 10. "A core team." Felix paused. "He'll have Daniel Rice there. Reese handles the operational details. Hale handles the conversation." "So Hale will be there himself?" "Yes." "Good," Elena said. Damien made a sound, not quite a word. "If Hale is in the building, we have leverage," Elena said without looking up. "He didn't send a proxy. He wants to be in the room when I hand over whatever he thinks I'm handing over, which means he wants to see my face when it happens. He wants to watch." She traced the building perimeter with one finger. "That's a weakness. People who want to watch things personally are harder to extract than people who manage from a distance." "Elena," Damien said, "I need 10 more minutes with this map." "Elena." His voice had a different weight to it now. She looked up. His expression was doing the thing again, the thing she had no good name for, the thing with too much surface area. "I need you to understand what we are walking into tonight. I understand what we're walking into." "Do you?" He wasn't arguing. He was asking, genuinely, carefully, in the way of someone who needed the answer to be true. "Because what I need from you is not bravery. I have people who are brave. What I need is for you to be exactly as precise and controlled tonight as you have been every other day of the 3 years you've worked beside me. And I need you to do it in a building owned by a man who has already decided you are expendable." She held his gaze. "Then I guess we both know what we're dealing with." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and looked back at the map. They spent the next 3 hours building the plan in layers. Felix coordinated the security team by phone, moving people into position in the Wynwood district before full dark, establishing sight lines to the building's exterior entrances. Marco drove the perimeter twice and came back with a detailed count of vehicles he'd clocked near the building. 3, all dark, all with a specific unremarkable quality of cars that were trying not to be noticed. Isabella sat in the living room of the Coral Gables house with Carmen Marquez, and Elena heard them talking once when she passed the doorway. Low, continuous, the particular rhythm of 2 women who have both spent significant portions of their lives managing fear quietly while the people around them managed it loudly. She did not stop to listen. She needed to not think about her mother right now. At 7:30, She sat alone in a bedroom at the back of the house and built the document package. It took her 45 minutes. She used a laptop Felix had cleared and a printer she found in the home office, and she worked from memory. Because the contents of the Doral storage unit were her memory, 3 years of handling those files had made them part of her the way a phone number you've dialed enough times becomes part of you. She built a package that looked exactly like the Orion merger sub-account documentation. It had the right headers, the right account structures, the right formatting. It had numbers that were close enough to the real figures to pass a quick visual inspection and different enough, in the specific ways that mattered, to be useless to anyone who tried to act on them. She built a second layer into the package. Hidden inside the formatting of 3 pages, coded into the document structure itself, in a way that only someone who knew exactly what to look for would find, was something else. A record of a specific transaction from 11 years ago, the real record, the one that showed where the money Victor Hale had diverted actually went, and who had authorized each movement. The proof that the document Victor had used to turn Sandra Voss was a fabrication. If Elena could get that package into a room where it was digitally processed, scanned, uploaded, run through any kind of document management system, the embedded data would transmit automatically to an external server Felix had set up in under 20 minutes. It was not a perfect plan. It had significant points of failure, and it required Elena to be in a room with Victor Hale long enough for a digital transfer to complete while also convincing him that what she was handing over was real, while also keeping Rosa alive, while also not getting herself killed. She looked at what she'd built for a moment. Then she put it in a plain manila folder, the kind she had used 10,000 times at work, and she stood up and went to find Damien. He was in the hallway. He had been, she suspected, in the hallway for a while. She held out the folder. "Here's what I'm carrying in." He took it, opened it, read through the top pages with the focused speed of someone who understood financial documents at a structural level, stopped at the 3rd page, read it more slowly. "The embedded data," he said. "Felix helped me build the transmission protocol," she said. "As soon as the document is run through any networked scanner or document system, which Hale's people will do, they'll want to verify the files are real before they let me walk out. It sends. And if they don't scan it, then I need to be in that room long enough for me to find another way to trigger it," she said. "There are 3 other pages in the package with the same embedded protocol. Any one of them in a networked system will do it." He looked at her. "You built this in 45 minutes. I've been handling these files for 3 years, she said. "I know them the way you know the names of every person who owes you something." Something in his face moved. "That's a very specific comparison." "I've been watching you for 3 years, she said. "Some of it stuck." He closed the folder. He held it for a moment, and then he held it out to her, and their hands were both on it at the same time, and neither of them moved for a second that felt longer than it was. "When this is over," he said. "When this is over," she agreed. Not a question, not a promise. An acknowledgement that there was something on the other side of tonight that they had both decided to believe in. She took the folder. At 9:15, they left the Coral Gables house in 2 vehicles. Elena rode with Damien and Marco. Felix and 3 other men followed in a separate car. They drove through the Miami night in silence. The city lit up and entirely unaware. People at restaurants and bars and evening walks along the bay, living the kind of ordinary Thursday that Elena had been living before all of this, before one night changed the entire architecture of her life. She sat in the back of the car with the manila folder on her lap, and her hands flat on top of it, and she thought about Rosa smiling at Daniel Rice on the sidewalk outside her building, and she used that image the way you use a splinter under your skin, as a reminder of exactly what was real, and what was at stake, and what was not acceptable. They stopped 4 blocks from the warehouse at 9:40. Damien turned to her in the back seat. Marco sat very still in front, not looking at either of them, giving them the courtesy of privacy in a car that didn't have much of it. "You walk in at 10, Damien said. "You have 90 minutes before we move on the building regardless of where the plan stands. If the transmission has completed by then, we pull you out. If it hasn't, I'll have found another way to trigger it," she said. "Elena." "I know. I'm serious." "Damien." She said it the way she'd said it 100 times, calm, direct, cutting through. "I know." A pause. I've been managing impossible situations for 3 years. I just didn't always know that's what I was doing. He looked at her for a long moment. The car was warm and the city sounds came through the closed windows, and it was not the right moment for the things that were in the room or the car between them. She knew that. He knew that. They had both gotten very good at knowing things and setting them aside for when the moment was right. Come back, he said. 2 words. No decoration. I intend to, she said. She opened the door and got out into the Miami night. The walk to the warehouse took 6 minutes. She counted them. She was wearing dark slacks and a jacket and flat shoes she'd borrowed from the Coral Gables house. Sensible things, things she could move in. And she carried the manila folder under one arm and kept her pace even and her head up, and she thought about nothing except the next immediate thing. The next step. The next breath. The warehouse had a side entrance that someone had left unlocked. Deliberate. An invitation. She pushed it open and went in. The interior was vast and partially subdivided with temporary walls from the renovation work. Track lighting on the upper level threw everything below into a half-dark that kept the far corners invisible. She could smell industrial cleaner and under it something older. Machine oil, dust, the residue of a building that had been many things. 2 men appeared from her left before she'd taken 10 steps. Large, professional, no wasted movement. One held out a hand. The bag, he said. She had no bag. She had the folder. She handed it over without resistance. He gave it to the second man, who disappeared with it. A search. They'd run it through their system and the transmission would begin immediately, but they hadn't given it back, which meant she needed a reason to stay in this building until the transmission completed. This way, the first man said. She followed him. They went up a half-flight of stairs to a mezzanine level, a large open space that had been set up with the specific functional minimalism of a room that was intended to serve a purpose for a short time and then be vacated. A table, several chairs, lights positioned to illuminate the center of the space, and at the far end, 2 things. Rosa, seated in a chair with her hands zip-tied in front of her, wearing the same clothes she'd left in this morning, her face pale, but her jaw set in the specific expression of a woman who is furious rather than frightened and managing the furious with visible effort. And Victor Hale. He was not what Elena had imagined, which was itself informative. She had built a picture of him from documents and second-hand accounts, and that picture had been powerful, imposing, the way powerful men presented themselves when they wanted to be perceived as untouchable. Victor Hale in person was 60, slim, wearing a suit that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, and had the particular composed pleasantness of someone who was very comfortable with the situation he was in. He looked like someone's well-off uncle. He looked like a man who attended charity functions and knew the right wines. He looked like a man who was used to winning. Miss Marquez, he said. His voice was mild, Eastern accented, measured. Thank you for coming. Elena looked at Rosa. Rosa looked back at her and mouthed 2 words. Elena couldn't quite read them. I'm okay, maybe, or I'm sorry, possibly both. Let her go, Elena said. Once we've confirmed the documents, Victor said. Pleasantly, like this was a business exchange. My people are processing them now. Shouldn't be long. The documents are real, Elena said. I brought what you asked for. Of course. He gestured to a chair. Sit down. She sat. Because she needed time, and sitting bought time, and every second that passed was a second closer to the transmission completing. Victor sat across from her. Daniel Rice stood to his left. Elena looked at him and found him looking back at her with the practiced blankness of a man who did not want to be memorable. I want you to know, Victor said, that I have no personal grievance against you. I appreciate that, Elena said. You were a complication, he said, nothing more. You had access to material that was relevant to my interests, and you were associated with a family that has caused me a significant amount of unnecessary difficulty over a very long time. He tilted his head slightly. I understand you and Damien Valverde got married recently. Last night, Elena said. Impulsive, he said. Some decisions are, she said. He almost smiled. You're calmer than I expected. People underestimate me, she said. It's a thing that happens. Something moved in his expression, a flicker of something that might have been appreciation or its darker cousin. Sandra told me you were perceptive, he said. She said it was something Damien relied on, whether he acknowledged it or not. Elena kept her face still. Sandra's been thorough. She has. A pause. She's also made certain decisions that have limited her future options considerably. He said it with the mildness of someone noting a mild disappointment. People who work against their original loyalty rarely find a comfortable home anywhere afterward. Is that a warning? Elena asked. It's an observation, he said. I'm not in the habit of threatening people I don't need to threaten. He looked at her steadily. You're not a threat to me, Miss Marquez. You're a secretary who processed documents she didn't fully understand, employed by a family that has been building toward a fall for quite some time. I have no interest in your continued involvement in any of this. Then why take my friend? Incentive, he said, simply, without apology. You needed a reason to come here without bringing an army. And if I'd brought an army anyway, then your friend would have had a much less comfortable evening. Still mild, still pleasant. I am practical, not cruel. There's a distinction. Elena looked at Rosa. Rosa's jaw was still set. Her eyes were doing something complicated. The look she got when she was paying extremely close attention to a situation while appearing to be simply sitting there. How long does your document verification process take? Elena asked. Victor glanced at Rice. Rice checked his phone. They're about halfway through the scan, Rice said. Halfway. The transmission was halfway complete. She needed to keep Victor Hale talking for approximately 7 more minutes. I want to ask you something, Elena said. Ask, Victor said. The document you showed Sandra, Elena said. The one that implicated Emilio Valverde in the original fund diversion. Victor went very still. It was the first time since she'd entered the building that his composure showed a crack. Just a hairline fracture, the kind you had to be looking for to see. But she was looking for it. That's not a topic I expected you to raise, he said. Sandra told me about it, Elena said. She did not look away from him. Before the situation changed, we had several conversations about her concerns, about the history of the organization, a carefully constructed lie, told with the flat confidence of someone presenting a fact. She showed me the document. Did she? Victor said. She was trying to understand it, Elena said. She came to me because I handled the financial files. She wanted to know if it was consistent with the records I'd processed. She paused. It wasn't. The room was very quiet. The transaction dates in your document don't match the actual account activity from that period, Elena said. The sub-account structure that existed 11 years ago wasn't capable of the kind of movement your document describes. The routing format changed in a system update in the spring of the year in question. Your document uses the post-update format, but the transaction date it claims is 3 months before the update occurred. Victor Hale looked at her. She held his gaze. You built a very convincing fake, she said. But you built it using the current system architecture because that's what you had access to. The historical architecture is only visible in files that nobody was supposed to still have. She paused. I have them. Where? He said. The mildness was gone now, entirely and suddenly the way weather changes. In the transmission your people just completed, she said. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Rice's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did something. Sir, Rice said. Victor didn't look away from Elena. What? The document package has a... Rice stopped. Started again. There's a data transmission embedded in the files. It's been sending to an external server. It's complete. The room changed, not loudly, not immediately. But Elena felt it. The specific shift of a situation moving from one thing to another. The moment when a plan that someone thought they controlled reveals itself as something else. What was in the transmission? Victor said, still looking at Elena. His voice had not raised. If anything, it was quieter. The real Valverde financial records from 11 years ago, Elena said, including the documentation of where the diverted funds actually went, who authorized each transaction, and the metadata that proves your fabricated document was created 14 months ago, not 11 years ago. She paused. It's been sent to 3 recipients: Felix Ruiz, who you probably know, a financial forensics attorney whose name I'll decline to mention, and a journalist at the Miami Herald who has been looking for a reason to write about the history of criminal enterprise in this city for approximately 4 years. Victor Hales stood up. Not fast, not dramatically, deliberately, like a man who was making a decision with his body while his mind was still calculating. You walked into this building knowing, he said. I walked into this building because you have my friend, Elena said. She stood as well because she was not going to have this conversation from a seated position. And because you have spent 6 months treating me like the least important piece on the board, and I needed you to keep thinking that long enough to let your people run the files through a networked system. For a moment, one long suspended moment, nothing happened. Then Victor Hales said quietly and with absolute clarity, Rice. And Rice moved. He moved toward Rosa. Elena moved faster than she would have predicted she was capable of moving, pushing off from the chair and crossing the 8 feet between her and Rosa with a momentum that was not skill, but was something rawer than skill, the specific speed of someone with no acceptable alternative. She put herself between Rice and Rosa, and she had nothing in her hands, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. Rice stopped. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and her heart was hammering so loud she could hear it, and her hands were shaking, and she held his gaze, and she did not step back. Think about what you're doing, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. The transmission is done. Whatever you do in this building in the next 10 minutes is on record. Whatever you do to us ends up in a courtroom. She breathed. You can walk out of here, both of you. You can be out of Miami before morning. Or, Victor said from behind her. His voice had gone somewhere cold and specific. She turned to face him. Behind him, she could see 2 of his other men moving in from the edges of the room. The room was getting smaller. Or, Victor said, I take what's in front of me, which is the woman who just made a significant miscalculation, and I use it to negotiate a very different kind of outcome with Damian Valverde. He won't negotiate, Elena said. Every man negotiates for the right price, Victor said. Not this one, Elena said. Not for this. Victor studied her face. She watched him do it, watched him read something in it that he wasn't prepared for. Not defiance. Certainty. The specific certainty of someone who knows the person they're talking about better than the person speaking does. You really believe that, Victor said. I know it, Elena said. Something shifted in Victor's face. The assessment recalculated. And then the east side loading dock door came in. Not quietly, not surgically. It came in the way things come in when someone has decided that precision is a secondary concern and speed is the only thing that matters. A concussive impact that shook the floor and sent dust from the overhead beams and was followed immediately by shouting and movement and the specific organized chaos of people who had been waiting a very long time to move. Marco came through first, then 3 others Elena didn't know by name, but recognized from the Valverde security rotation. Behind them, moving fast and without his jacket, and with an expression on his face that she had never seen in 3 years but recognized immediately. Damian. He had not waited 90 minutes. He had lasted 43. Victor Hale's men reacted. Some of them. The ones closer to the exits made calculations and moved. 2 near the center of the room made different calculations and reached for different things. Elena grabbed Rosa's zip-tied wrists, pulled her out of the chair, and put the chair between them and the nearest threat, with the specific practical instinct of someone who had spent 3 years anticipating problems before they fully arrived. Can you run? Elena said. I can absolutely run, Rosa said. Her voice was shaking, but her legs were already moving. They moved. The mezzanine had a back stairway. She'd clocked it when she came in, filed it the same way she filed everything, quietly and without announcing it. She found it in the dark and the chaos, and Rosa stayed close behind her, their feet loud on the metal steps, the sounds of the floor above them loud and complicated in ways she was not allowing herself to fully process. They hit the ground floor, and there was a man in the doorway at the bottom of the stairs. Elena stopped so fast Rosa ran into her from behind. The man in the doorway looked at them. It was Felix. "Car's outside," he said. "East side, go." She went. The night air hit her like something physical, warm and salt-heavy, and real in a way the inside of that building hadn't been. Rosa was beside her, breathing hard, wrists still zip-tied, and Elena grabbed her arm and they ran for the car, and Elena did not look back. She would not find out until later. Until after the car had reached the street and Felix had caught up, and the sounds from inside the building had changed and then stopped. What had happened on the mezzanine between Damien Valverde and Victor Hale? But she would find out. And what happened in those minutes in the dark of a Wynwood warehouse while Elena and Rosa ran for the East Side exit was the thing that ended a 12-year war and changed the shape of everything that came after. She sat in the back of the car with Rosa pressed against her side and Rosa's head on her shoulder and Miami streaming past the windows, and she breathed. In and out, in and out. She was still holding the breathing when the back door opened and Damien got in. He was not uninjured. She saw that immediately. A cut above his left eyebrow, not serious but bleeding in the theatrical way head cuts do, and he was holding his right side in a way that suggested something had happened to his ribs. He sat down heavily, closed the door. Marco was already driving. Damien looked at Elena. She looked back at him. "Victor?" she said. "Marco's people have him," Damien said. "Rice ran. Felix is handling it. Sandra." "We'll deal with Sandra in the morning," he said. "She's not going anywhere." Rosa lifted her head from Elena's shoulder and looked at Damien with the direct assessment of a woman who had been zip-tied in a warehouse for the better part of an evening and had therefore earned the right to say whatever she wanted. "You're bleeding on your shirt," Rosa said. "I'm aware," Damien said. "Is it bad?" "No." "Are you going to pass out?" "No." "Okay," Rosa said, and put her head back on Elena's shoulder. Damien looked at Elena again. She looked at the cut on his forehead, the way he was holding his ribs, the specific exhausted focus of a man who had moved very fast tonight for reasons he was not going to say out loud in a car with other people. She reached into her jacket pocket and found a packet of tissues. A habit, 3 years of always having tissues, because Damien always needed them during allergy season and never remembered to carry them himself. She held them out. He looked at them. He looked at her. He took them. "The transmission completed," she said. "All 3 recipients." "I know," he said. Felix confirmed it. "It's enough," she said, "for the attorney, for the fraud case, for the fabricated document." She paused. "Your father's name is clean." Something happened in Damien's face that she looked away from, because it was private, and she knew it, and she was not going to watch a man absorb something that personal in the back seat of a car at 11 p.m. with blood on his forehead and 3 other people present. She looked out the window instead. Miami moved past. The bay came into view briefly, lit up and indifferent, beautiful the way Miami always was at night, regardless of what was happening at street level. In the front seat, Marco spoke quietly into his phone. Rosa breathed slowly against Elena's shoulder, the specific breathing of someone who had been frightened for a long time and was finally allowing themselves to stop. And Elena sat in the dark of the moving car with the particular weight of someone who has done the thing, the specific, irreversible thing, and is now sitting with what it cost and what it changed and what comes next. What came next was the question, because the night was almost over. But the morning was going to require her to be a different kind of brave than the kind she'd used tonight, and she already knew it, and she was already, quietly, beginning to prepare for it. The hospital was not where Elena wanted to be at midnight, but the cut above Damien's eyebrow needed 4 stitches, and his ribs needed imaging, and she had learned enough about the man over 3 years to know that he would not go voluntarily unless someone made it inconvenient to refuse. She made it inconvenient to refuse. Marco drove. Rosa sat in the front, her wrists finally freed from the zip ties by a pocket knife Felix had produced with the casual efficiency of someone who carried pocket knives the way other people carried pens. She was quiet in a way that Elena recognized as the specific quiet of someone processing something large, holding it at a careful distance until they were somewhere safe enough to let it land fully. The emergency room at Jackson Memorial was what emergency rooms always were at midnight. loud in some corridors and deeply silent in others, the particular fluorescent light that made everyone look slightly worse than they were, the smell of antiseptic and old coffee, and the specific human exhaustion of a place where people arrived at their worst moments. A nurse led Damien to a bay without ceremony, the way medical people handled men who were bleeding but ambulatory, efficiently, without drama. Elena sat in the waiting area with Rosa. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. Then Rosa said, "He sent his men in 43 minutes early." "I know." "The plan was 90 minutes." "I know." "That is not a man who made a strategic calculation," Rosa said. "That is a man who lasted 43 minutes and then couldn't stand it anymore." Elena looked at the floor. It was the same linoleum pattern she had seen in hospitals her entire life, endlessly reproducible, deliberately inoffensive. "Rosa," she said. "I'm just making an observation," Rosa said. "I know what you're doing." "I've been zip-tied to a chair for 6 hours," Rosa said. "I've earned the right to make observations." A pause. "He was already moving when the transmission confirmed. Felix told me. He was already telling Marco to go before he knew for certain the plan had worked." Elena said nothing. "I'm not saying it's simple," Rosa said. "I'm saying it's true." She shifted in her plastic chair and winced. Her wrists were raw where the ties had been. "None of this is simple. You woke up married to a man you've been quietly in love with for 3 years, someone tried to kill you, I got kidnapped, and a criminal enterprise has been dismantled in the span of about 18 hours. She paused. "That's not simple. But the part where he came in early is simple. That part is just true." Elena looked at her best friend. Rosa looked back. Her face was tired and her hair was a disaster, and there was a red mark across both her wrists, and she was still, despite everything, the most grounded person Elena had ever known. "Are you okay?" Elena asked. Actually asked, not as a transitional question, but as the real thing. Rosa considered it honestly, the way Rosa did everything. "I was scared," she said. "Rice kept telling me nothing was going to happen to me if I stayed quiet, which is both reassuring and completely terrifying as a statement, because it means something would have happened if I hadn't stayed quiet." She looked at her wrists. "I stayed quiet." A pause. "I'm okay. I think I'll be okay. I'm going to need about 4 days and a very large amount of bad television." She looked back at Elena. "But I'm okay." Elena reached over and took Rosa's hand, the careful way, avoiding the raw skin. They sat like that until the nurse came to tell Elena she could go back. Damien was in a hospital bay that had the institutional privacy of a curtain on a metal rail, technically separated from the rest of the room, practically not. He was sitting on the edge of the bed with 4 stitches above his left eyebrow, and the particular controlled stillness of a man who had been told by medical staff to stop moving and was accepting this instruction with limited patience. His shirt had been removed for the rib imaging. He was sitting in the examination light looking like a man who had walked through something and was still deciding what it had cost him. Elena came around the curtain and he looked up. She sat in the chair beside the bed without being asked. "Cracked," he said before she could ask. 2 ribs. Not broken. They want me to breathe carefully for 6 weeks, which is not a thing I know how to do." "You'll manage," she said. The doctor was very specific about the breathing. "I'll remind you." He looked at her steadily. Something in his expression was different from every other version of it she'd catalogued over 3 years. Stripped of the professional layer, of the managerial control, of the reputation that had always occupied the air around him before the man himself did. He was just a person in a hospital bay at midnight with stitches on his face and broken ribs and blood he hadn't fully cleaned off his hands yet. "Victor Hale is in custody," he said. "Marco's people handed him to the FBI field office at 11:40. The transmission data from tonight was received by the forensic attorney, and she has already filed a preliminary motion to reopen the investigation into the fund diversion from 12 years ago." "And the Miami Herald journalist?" "He called Felix at 11:15. He wants a conversation." Damien paused. "We will have that conversation very carefully and with legal counsel present." "Obviously," she said. A brief silence. The sounds of the hospital moved around them, distant, functional. "Sandra," Elena said. Damien's jaw tightened. The same tension she'd cataloged this morning in the Coral Gables kitchen. It had a different quality now, less controlled, more exposed. The tension of someone who has had hours to sit with a betrayal and still hasn't found a place to put it. She called Felix at 10:30, he said, while everything was still happening. She told him she wanted to cooperate, that she had documentation of all the information she had passed to Hale, dates, contents, recipients. He stopped. She said she was sorry. She said she had been told things about my father that she believed, and that she had spent 2 years trying to figure out if she'd been wrong, and that she was now certain she had been wrong, and she didn't know how to undo it. Elena thought about Sandra Voss. 8 years of loyalty to a family, collapsed by a document that was convincing enough to shake something fundamental. The grief of discovering that the man she'd trusted could be cast in a different light. The specific vulnerability of people who love something and then receive evidence that what they loved was not what they thought. "What are you going to do?" Elena asked. "Cooperate with her cooperation," Damien said. "Her testimony strengthens the case against Hale significantly. After that," he stopped. "After that, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that yet." "That's an honest answer," she said. "I'm trying to give those more often," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The fluorescent light above them was doing nobody any favors, and the curtain rail was slightly crooked, and the chair she was sitting in had a wobble in the left front leg that she had already compensated for twice, and none of it was cinematic or arranged, and somehow that was the most honest version of this moment she could have asked for. "Your mother," Elena said. "She needs to know about the document, the fabricated transaction record, the proof that your father didn't authorize what Victor claimed he did." "I know. That's not a conversation that should wait." "I know," he said again, quieter. "She's been carrying that, the possibility of it, for 12 years. She never said it to me directly, but I know she found the document somehow. I think Sandra showed it to her as well, at some point. I think my mother spent 12 years not knowing if her husband was who she believed him to be." His voice was very controlled, too controlled, in the way that meant the control was doing significant work. "I think that's what Victor wanted, not just to destroy the organization, to make her uncertain, to make everything she'd built feel like it was on a foundation that might not hold." Elena was quiet for a moment. "It holds," she said. "The foundation holds. The records are clear. I've read every page of those files 3 times, and your father's hands are clean." She paused. "Victor built his lie very well, but he built it on the wrong architecture, and I found the gap." Damien looked at her for a long time. "You did," he said, simply, not with the particular tone of someone acknowledging an employee's good work, with the tone of someone acknowledging a person. They left the hospital at 2 in the morning. Rosa went with Felix, who was taking her to a hotel. A clean, safe, entirely boring hotel with room service and a door that locked from the inside, which was exactly what Rosa had requested, and which Felix had arranged without comment. Elena hugged her for a long time at the hospital entrance, and Rosa hugged back and said, "Call me in the morning," and then looked at Elena and said, "Or afternoon, if morning is complicated." And Elena made the sound that was not quite a laugh again. The drive back to Damien's penthouse was quiet. Marco drove. Elena sat in the back with Damien beside her and the city outside the windows doing what the city always did, moving, lit up, indifferent to the scale of what had happened inside it tonight. At some point between the hospital and the bay, Damien's hand found hers in the dark of the back seat. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just found it. The way something gravitates towards something else when the distance between them has finally gotten too small to maintain. She did not move her hand away. Marco, in the front seat, found something extremely interesting to look at on the road ahead, and kept his eyes there for the remainder of the drive. They reached the penthouse at 2:40. Isabella Valverde was there. Elena had not expected that, and she stopped in the doorway of the living room for a moment when she saw her. The older woman sitting in a chair near the window, fully dressed, not asleep, in the manner of someone who had been waiting and had decided to wait with dignity rather than anxiety. Carmen Marquez was asleep on the couch across from her, covered with a blanket that someone had placed over her with care, her breathing slow and even. Isabella looked at Elena when she entered. Then she looked at Damien behind her, at the stitches, at the way he was holding his side. She stood up. She crossed the room to her son, and she put one hand against the side of his face, the uninjured side, the careful placement of a woman who understood exactly where the damage was. And she looked at him for a moment without speaking. Something passed between them that had no language. The specific communication of people who have shared a long history and a long grief and are standing together on the other side of something that both of them are still absorbing. Then Isabella stepped back. She looked at Elena. "Sit down," she said. Not a command, an offering. They sat. Damien lowered himself onto the couch with the careful economy of a man with cracked ribs, and Elena sat beside him, and Isabella took her chair again, and for a moment the only sound was Carmen's slow breathing from across the room. "The document," Isabella said, looking at Elena. "Felix told me." "The original transaction records are clear," Elena said. "Your husband didn't authorize the diversion. Victor constructed the fabrication using system architecture that didn't exist at the time of the dated transaction. The metadata makes the forgery provable." Isabella was very still. "Emilio's name is clean," Elena said. She said it directly, without softening, because she understood that Isabella Valverde did not want this information softened. She wanted it delivered the way she had lived her life, clearly and without decoration. Whatever Victor told Sandra, whatever document he showed her, or showed anyone else, it doesn't hold up. Your husband was the one who was stolen from. He was the one who confronted that theft, and the records show it. Isabella Valverde had been composed for the entirety of the time Elena had known her, which was now approximately 12 hours. She had been composed in the sitting room in Coral Gables when she delivered annulment papers and legal counsel. She had been composed when her son walked into a hospital at midnight with a cut on his face. She had built composure into the architecture of how she existed in the world, the same way she had built everything else, deliberately, over a long time, because it was necessary. She was not composed now. It was not dramatic. She did not cry loudly or collapse or make the kind of grief that announces itself. It was smaller than that and larger at the same time, a held breath released after 12 years, the particular sound of someone who has been braced against something for so long that the absence of it is its own kind of impact. She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and looked at the window and breathed. Damien reached across and put his hand over hers on the armrest of her chair. She turned her hand over and held it. Elena looked at the bay through the window. The water was dark and lit in pieces by the city's reflection, moving the way it always moved, the same as it had been moving before any of this began. Her mother slept on the couch across the room. After a while, Isabella composed herself in the specific way she did everything, from the inside out, quietly, without requiring anyone to acknowledge the process. She straightened. She looked at Elena. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't," Elena said. "I came to that house today with a lawyer and annulment papers," Isabella said. "I had not spoken to you for more than 5 minutes. I had decided what you were before I knew who you were." She paused. "That was wrong." Elena looked at this woman who had built an empire from grief and necessity, and had done it without ever letting the weight of it show until now, in this room, at 3 a.m. "You were protecting your family," Elena said. "I understand that." "I was protecting my idea of my family," Isabella said. "Which is different, and not always useful." She looked at Damien, then back at Elena. "You went into that building tonight with a plan you built in 45 minutes, and a folder and nothing else, to get your friend back, and to close a 12-year wound in this family." A pause. "I did not expect that from you." "Nobody did," Elena said. "That was the point." Something moved in Isabella's expression. Recognition, deeper than what had been there in the Coral Gables sitting room. The recognition of a woman seeing another woman who had made herself underestimated and then used it, and understanding exactly what that cost. "The emerald necklace," Isabella said. "The one that belongs to the women of this family." She reached into the pocket of her jacket and set it on the table between them. The same necklace Elena had read about in the Valverde family history that she'd processed in various documents. A piece that had belonged to Damien's grandmother, passed down through women who had stood beside the men of this family at significant moments. I brought it to the Coral Gables house this morning with the intention of keeping it in my possession until I decided what the situation warranted. She looked at Elena directly. I've decided. Elena looked at the necklace on the table. It was not a large piece, not ostentatious, a deep green stone in a simple setting, worn with the particular patina of something that had been handled by careful hands over a long time. It looked like something that meant things. Mrs. Valverde, Elena said carefully. Isabella, the older woman said. I think we're past Mrs. Valverde. Elena was quiet for a moment. I haven't decided anything yet, Elena said. About the marriage? About any of it. Last night was... She stopped. Tried again. I'm not the same person I was yesterday morning. I don't think any of us are. And I need some time to stand still and figure out what I actually want, as opposed to what circumstances have arranged around me. She paused. I think that's fair. It's more than fair, Isabella said. I'm not saying no, Elena said. She was not looking at Damien when she said this, but she was aware of him the way she was always aware of him, peripherally, completely. I'm saying I need to know that whatever comes next comes from something real, something I chose without a crisis attached to it. She looked at Isabella. And I think that's what your son deserves too. Not a decision made at 3 a.m. after someone tried to kill us. Isabella looked at her for a moment. Then she said, You know, my husband used to say that the most dangerous thing about a smart woman is that she always knows exactly what she's saying. Was that a compliment? Elena asked. From Emilio, everything was a compliment, Isabella said, and for the first time a small smile. Not performed, not managed, a real one, the kind that had a little grief in it and a little warmth, the mixture that comes from loving someone who is gone. She left an hour later, quietly, without ceremony, the way she did most things. Carmen woke when the front door closed and sat up on the couch with the specific alert confusion of a woman who had been a light sleeper since Elena was 7 years old, and a single mother meant that every sound mattered. What time is it? Carmen said. Almost 4, Elena said. Carmen looked at her daughter. At the jacket she was still wearing, the flat shoes borrowed from someone else's house, the specific tired clarity of a face that had been through something. Are you hurt? Carmen said. No. Is he hurt? Carmen looked at Damien across the room. Cracked ribs, 4 stitches, Elena said. Carmen said, in the tone that meant she was collecting information rather than expressing judgment. She looked at the necklace on the table. She looked back at Elena. She said nothing. Mom, Elena said. I'm not saying anything, Carmen said. You're thinking loudly again. I'm always thinking loudly, Carmen said. You know this about me. She stood, folding the blanket someone had put over her with the automatic neatness of a woman who had been folding blankets her entire adult life. I'm going to bed. You should also go to bed. She looked at Damien one more time. You too. You look terrible. Thank you, Mrs. Marquez, Damien said. Carmen, she said, already walking toward the hallway. We're past Mrs. Marquez. The room was quiet after she left. The particular quiet of 4 a.m. in a city that had not stopped moving, the bay outside still dark and lit in pieces, the penthouse ceiling high and white, and too expensive for a regular person, which was something Elena had noticed this morning and was now noticing again in a different way. The same ceiling, different everything else. Damien was looking at the necklace on the table. I want to tell you something, he said. All right, she said. Last night, when you said what you said at the dinner, he stopped. The careful organizing pause. She knew it. Let him have it. I did not marry you because it was strategic. I want to be clear about that. Not because strategy wasn't present. The threat was real, and the legal protection is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But that's not... He stopped again. The pause was longer this time. For 3 years, I watched you manage every difficult thing this organization threw at you. I watched you handle problems that would have broken people with twice your resources and twice your authority. I watched you do it without recognition, without complaint, without ever once asking for anything back. He looked at her directly. And I told myself that noticing that was a professional observation, that it was a slight pause. Efficient to appreciate an efficient person. Despite everything, something loosened in Elena's chest. That's a very Damien Valverde way to frame it, she said. I know, he said. It was a lie I told myself for 2 years. He looked at the necklace, then at her. When you stood up at that dinner and said what you said, I was not surprised by the content. I was surprised that you finally said it out loud, because I had spent a significant amount of time knowing what you felt and choosing to not acknowledge it because acknowledging it meant acknowledging what I felt. And I had spent a significant amount of time deciding that what I felt was not something I was allowed to act on. Why? She said. Because you worked for me, he said. Because the power difference was real, and I was not willing to be the kind of man who... He stopped. I was not willing to be a man who uses his position to get something he wants from someone who might feel unable to refuse. Elena looked at him. So I waited, he said. For 3 years, I managed it. I told myself it was professional courtesy. I told myself it was discipline. A pause. And then you stood up in a room full of people and refused to be managed anymore. And I stopped being disciplined. The city moved outside the windows. A boat crossed the bay. Small, lit, unhurried. The annulment, Elena said. He was very still. I'm not signing it, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not signing it because I've decided not to. She looked at him directly. I'm also not... I need us to be honest about what this is and what it isn't yet. We didn't choose this the right way. We didn't get the conversation first and the marriage second. We did it backward and in a crisis, and neither of us was... She stopped. I need to know that there's time, that we can get to know each other as this, not as employer and employee, that I'm not just managing a new kind of situation. You have all the time you need, he said. And I want to keep working, she said, not as your secretary. I don't think I can be your secretary anymore. That ship has genuinely sailed, but I know this organization better than most of the people in it, and I'm not willing to walk away from something I spent 3 years building just because the nature of my involvement changed. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like a calibration. The look of someone finding that the thing they hoped for was more precisely the thing they hoped for than they'd allowed themselves to believe. What would you want to do? He said. Something with a title that reflects what I actually do, she said. Because what I actually do is not secretarial work. What I actually do is understand the whole picture when everyone else is focused on their piece of it. What I did tonight with those documents, that's not a skill that came from nowhere. It came from 3 years of being in every room and being treated like furniture, and I have no interest in being furniture anymore. No, he said, you won't be. A silence. A real one. Not the kind with weight, but the kind that comes after weight has been set down. She reached across and picked up the necklace, held it in her palm. The stone was cool from sitting on the table, heavier than it looked. Your grandmother wore this, she said. My grandmother built the first legitimate business in this family, he said. The import company. The one that made everything else possible. She did it alone for 5 years before my grandfather understood what she was doing. He paused. Isabella gives it to women who understand what standing beside someone actually means. Elena looked at the necklace in her hand. She thought about the woman who had first worn it, a woman whose name she had seen only once, in a footnote of a Valverde family document she'd processed 14 months ago. A woman who had built something real and patient and permanent without anyone recognizing it until it was already done. She thought about 3 years of being in every room and being looked through. She thought about a drunk confession at a dinner that turned out to be true, and a marriage certificate filed at 10:47 p.m. on a Thursday that turned out to be the beginning of something instead of the end of something. She closed her fingers around the necklace. She did not put it on, not yet. That was a different moment. A right moment. A moment she was going to choose deliberately and in full possession of herself, the way she should have chosen from the beginning. But she kept it. She held it. Damien watched her do it and said nothing, and his saying nothing was the right response, and she noted that about him the same way she had been noting things about him for 3 years, quietly, without announcement, filing it in the place where the true things lived. They sat in the living room as the city moved through the last of the night towards something that looked like morning, not talking constantly, not performing the comfort of being together, just present in the same space, both of them tired in the cellular way that comes from a day that has asked everything, both of them still in the specific way that comes after everything has been asked and given and spent. At some point, without quite knowing when she'd decided to, Elena leaned back against the arm of the couch, and she slept. She did not dream about anything dangerous. She did not dream about warehouses or running or zip ties or the sound of a loading dock door coming in. She dreamed about ordinary things, a window with light coming through it, the smell of coffee, the sound of Miami in the morning when the bay is calm, the simple inventory of a life that is continuing. When she woke, the light through the penthouse windows was the particular gold of early morning, 7 o'clock maybe, 7:30. Her back had the complaint of someone who had slept on a couch that was expensive but not designed for sleeping, and her feet were still in borrowed shoes, and the necklace was still in her hand, closed in her fingers where she'd kept it through the night. Damien was not on the couch. She heard movement in the kitchen, the particular sounds of someone who knew where things were, not searching, just moving, the sound of water, and then the specific sound of a coffee maker that she had not heard before but recognized by function. She sat up, ran one hand through her hair with the resigned pragmatism of someone who understood that this morning was not going to be the morning she looked pulled together, and that this was fine, and that pulled together had never been the thing that actually mattered. She stood. She walked to the kitchen doorway. Damien was at the counter with his back to her, moving carefully because of the ribs, making coffee with the focused imprecision of a man who was used to having coffee made for him and was doing it himself anyway. He had found a clean shirt. The stitches above his eye were visible from across the room, dark against his skin, the precise evidence of last night in the particular language of the body. He had not heard her in the doorway. Or if he hadn't turned. She watched him for a moment. This man who ran an empire and cracked his ribs on a Wednesday and made coffee badly on a Thursday morning, and had spent 3 years deciding that what he felt was not something he was allowed to say out loud. This man who was going to have a conversation with his mother today that would close a 12-year wound and open a 12-year grief properly for the first time. This man who had asked her to trust him for 60 seconds last night and had then failed to last 43 minutes. She walked into the kitchen. She reached past him and adjusted the coffee maker setting that he had on wrong, and the machine made a corrective sound and began doing what it was supposed to do. He turned and looked at her. She was very close. The kitchen was not large, and she had not moved back after fixing the coffee maker, and they were standing in the particular proximity of people who had stopped pretending that distance was the appropriate response. "You had it on the wrong setting," she said. "I know," he said. "I was going to figure it out. You were going to make terrible coffee and drink it anyway because asking for help with a coffee maker felt like a loss. That's an extremely specific reading of my psychology." "I've had 3 years of data," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. The morning light was doing something generous to the room, the way morning light does when it has survived the particular quality of the night before it. "Elena," he said. "I know," she said. And because she knew, and because it was morning now, and because the crisis was over, and what remained was simply the two of them in a kitchen at 7:30 with coffee that was going to be correctly brewed, and a day that was going to be complicated in the ordinary ways rather than the dangerous ones. Because all of that was true, she reached up and put the necklace around her own neck. Not for him, not for Isabella, not for the family or the name or the history of women who had stood beside difficult men and built real things anyway. For herself. Because she had decided. Because deciding was the only thing that had ever actually been hers. The clasp caught. The stone settled against her collarbone, cool and solid and real. Damien watched her do it. He did not say anything. He did not have to. She reached past him again and took down 2 mugs from the cabinet she'd correctly identified on her first try, because after 3 years of ordering his coffee and managing his schedule and knowing the layout of every Valverde property she'd ever filed a document for, she simply knew where things were. She poured the coffee that was now correctly made and handed him one and kept the other. "Your first meeting today," she said. "Is not until 10, he said. "I know, I scheduled it." A pause. "That's going to need to change, by the way. The scheduling, I'll train someone. It'll take about 3 months to get them properly calibrated, but it's manageable." "All right," he said. "And we need to talk to Felix today about the journalist, before he decides to go ahead without us." "Agreed. And you need to call your mother before 9. She'll be up by 7. "She's been up since 5, he said. "She doesn't sleep past 5. "Then call her now," Elena said. "She's been waiting 12 years for what you have to tell her. Don't make her wait until 9. He looked at her. Something in his face was the simplest version of itself she had ever seen. All the management stripped away, all the reputation and the calculation, and the weight of what it meant to be the person everyone needed him to be. Just a man in a kitchen in the morning who had loved someone quietly for too long and had finally stopped being quiet about it. "Okay," he said. He set down his coffee. He reached for his phone. She took her mug and walked to the window. Miami was fully awake now. The bay was lit with early light, the water moving the way it always moved, constant and indifferent and entirely itself. Somewhere across the city, Rosa was sleeping in a boring hotel room with room service and a locked door. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Victor Hale was having a considerably worse morning. In Coral Gables, her mother would be up soon, moving through an unfamiliar house with the adaptable pragmatism that had gotten her through everything life had put in front of her. Behind her, she heard Damien's voice, quiet and changed, saying, "Mother, I know. Yes, I know what time it is." A pause. "I need to tell you something about Dad." Elena stood at the window with her coffee and the morning light and the weight of a stone against her collarbone that she had put there herself, and she let the city be exactly what it was, loud and alive and continuing, as it always had, as it always would. The secretary who had spent 3 years making herself invisible stood in the full light of a Miami morning, and she did not disappear. She stayed. She had chosen to stay. And that, finally, completely, without confusion or crisis or the pressure of someone else's plan, was entirely her own.